get to. We are so happy to introduce GEEGA, who is a VTuber, also a member of VShojo, to Patch Notes. Everybody, please give a warm welcome to GEEGA. Thank you for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me.
GEEGA, great to have you. And in fact, just so everyone knows, GEEGA and I, we met earlier today, so I'm excited to looking forward to chatting with GEEGA for a while. And GEEGA, why don't you
Yeah.
share your pronouns for the audience, since I know that's particularly important in VTubing, and make sure I get it right.
Yes, no, I go by she, her. That's all fine with me.
Right. Yep.
Wonderful. GEEGA, I mean, my first question is just a
Mhm.
pretty simple one of like, tell me a little bit about your background in getting into VTubing and how long you've been VTubing.
Yeah, okay. So I'll start with I joined in around the same time a lot of streamers started streaming during the COVID boom, right? Everyone was at home and bored. So a lot of people, a lot of people started becoming viewers and watching Twitch, but a lot of people also decided to start streaming because they were at home doing nothing. Um, I actually come from a very long tech background, so I wasn't planning on becoming a professional streamer by any means. But I started doing it as a hobby because I was just home more, right? And I found VTubing interesting because of the tech behind it, because of the tools that were being used. And I saw that at the time, the tools were not that streamlined. They weren't very well made, etc. And I was really interested in seeing what I could do with that, knowing, that I could probably do a little more, eke a little more out of it. And yeah, so I just tried it and it ended up turning into a lot more than that.
Yeah. It is interesting. I don't have the data on this, but I
Mhm.
suspect if I did do a poll, I know as of right now I'm thinking of 3 or 4 data points that I know of VTubers that have a
Yeah.
tech background, and I suspect that what you'll
Yes.
see is a disproportionate, in fact, a large percentage of VTubers come from a tech background.
I would say yes for the ones that showed up around that era, around that time,
Yeah.
because the tools were very much not available to most people. And then I think
Mhm.
nowadays, a lot of the ones that have shown up in the past 2 years or so, it's much more available. The tech really does exist for anyone to hop into it easily.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's very true. In fact, one of the things I'll talk about is some of the tech with Yukiga, because for those
Mhm.
people that are interested in it, I think it's interesting. But before we get into that, Giga, so you started out, and by the way, you mentioned I wasn't full time. Are you full time now?
Yes, yes, I've been full time for maybe 2 years.
Yeah.
Mm.
hmm And why don't you talk about the journey from when you started up to becoming full time? Because I suspect there are a lot of people that, share
Yeah.
that they're thinking about it. Maybe, do I want to? The trade off, and all that.
Very much so. Yeah. So I started streaming after work every day. So I would stream around 8 p.m. Eastern and go until 2 a.m. Right, assuming I had no extra work I had to do after normal hours, and I would just do that every day for fun. That was it. But my first stream, I streamed with a friend who was also a VTuber that I had just kind of met online playing games and all of that, and she brought me on in a collab for my first ever stream, and I had I think over 15 viewers, like 15 to 20, which, for most people's first stream is very atypical.
Mhm.
So I said, okay, maybe I should stream often. So I kind of just immediately started streaming multiple days a week to see if I could carry that, because I felt that that was an opportunity most people don't have, right? They stream to no one to start for months. So I did that, and it just worked out. And the VTubing community, you mentioned earlier that you consider it sort of a meta community, right? Where the community isn't about the game people play or anything. It's really something a lot more vague, a lot wider. Um, and I found that that community was incredibly insistent on pushing forward smaller streamers within it. So if someone found a VTuber that they thought was nice, they had 10 viewers, everyone would go, "You should watch this person. You should watch this person." And they didn't do that to friends. They did that to people that they just thought were interesting or could make it. And so that's what happened to me. A lot of people started going, "Hey, you guys should watch this person. She's interesting, blah blah blah." And it turned into, something that really worked out. Um
Yeah.
and I just streamed and streamed and streamed and was grinding, and eventually it worked. That's really it.
Yeah. Well, it highlights.
Congratulations. It's a huge success to get to be full time, to be honest with you. And I think we all know
It's
that.
a
It is
big
a
deal.
wonderful accomplishment. So good for you.
It's tough. Yeah. Thank you.
One of the things you talked about, which I always say when streamers are starting, that
Mm,
you started it because you were enjoying it. And then over
yeah,
time, you started thinking, oh, well, maybe this will be a meaningful part of my life and how I fund my life. Right. And I
right.
always tell folks that, like, if streaming does take a fair amount of time, right? Because you have to be live. And if you
Yeah.
don't really enjoy it when you're live, and then when you're not live, saying, "Oh, I kind of miss streaming. I'm kind of looking forward to it. Oh, tonight I might be able to stream, right? Oh, I have some time tonight. I might be able to go on and stream." I know, like, for me today, just because of this and that, I'm like, "Oh, I may be able to do a stream tonight because
Hmm.
my wife's going to be here, and I'll be here, and without anything I need to do." And um, then in general, I think it's very hard. You're not going to do all that if you are doing it to be big. You need to enjoy being small because it does
Very
take
much so.
time. And then growth can come, and for some people,
Mm,
and for some people, it may not come. That's the interesting thing, is this idea that the other thing I often think about is, I think one of the things that's hard is if you feel like you always have to keep growing when you're streaming. So why don't
yeah.
you talk a little bit about that right now? Because now you've reached a
Mm,
certain level, and it is the fact that your livelihood depends upon your streaming, which creates more pressure
yes.
in terms of I need to grow, which creates, angst and anxiety and worry and tension, when part of what you want to just do is live and enjoy yourself.
Very much so. Yeah, I think it's like you said, it's a bit unique streaming in the vast world of content in that you have to be live to be
Mm.
gaining anything, right? Nothing is really gained passively. And obviously people have YouTube channels, whatever, they put videos up there. They tend to kind of split things out, but for the most part, if you're just a streamer, you just have to be live to be making any money, to be in front of your community and interacting with them if it's not even about the money for you, you know. So it's it's huge on the time. And it's easy to get into that mindset of I should just be live more. I should just stream more. I could grow more if I'm just here more. And people end up streaming for 16 hours sometimes, and then they end up hating it because they do way too much and they burn out. But I found for myself at least having a full-time job while I started streaming for the first, at least year and a half of it, that kept me from being able to do that, right? I would
Mhm.
stream after work. I'd have to sleep at some point because I would have to work the next day. And I found that I was able to pace myself, and I think that that actually was a big part of me being able to get to where I was, because I know myself, and if I did not have a day job, I would have been streaming 16 hours a day, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, sometimes, we talk about streamer burnout, right? And a lot of
Mhm.
streamers think about that. And I think um, it's absolutely the case that sometimes you get diminishing returns and you just think more, 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 and
Yeah.
then you overdo it. And actually, you do get diminishing returns. In other words, the difference between streaming 8 hours a day versus 12 hours a day, it's not the same between 0 and 4 hours,
Right.
right? It's significant that the marginal 4 hours is a lot less. Um, and then the other thing that I find interesting is you need to keep what you're doing on stream new and different. So talk to me
Mhm.
about how you do that. Like, what do you do on stream, and how
Yeah.
do you keep it interesting for you?
Okay. So for myself, the format of my streams is always that I do a long, long, long just chatting segment before I hop into some sort of game. So I do both chatting and gaming, and I'll sit there and talk and essentially podcast about whatever my chat brings up or something I saw earlier that day or just anything, gaming, whatever it is, for an hour to sometimes up to 3 hours before I actually start playing a game. Um, and then with gaming, sometimes it's collabs, sometimes it's whatever. I tend to play whatever is new and out, but I also do a heavy focus on indie games and trying to focus on things that are obscure and have no marketing. So I'm one of those creators that's very open to indie devs emailing me codes of their games and then I just test them on stream. And so
I
I've sort of built
also
up a
love indie
community in
games.
that.
What indie games do you like to
Yeah,
play?
so many. Obviously the most commonly produced indie game genre, which is a deck building roguelike, is probably my most favorite thing. Thankfully that they make a lot of those. I'll play a lot of those on stream. Things like that, beat 'em ups and fighting games, or little indie projects reminiscent of that. But I'll showcase anything that's very tiny on my stream. So because I did a lot of that, I built up a lot of community that likes to talk about those things as well. So a lot of the time when we would sit there and chat, they'd be discussing, things about the gaming industry, about indies, all of that.
That's awesome.
All right.
And they've had a really big year for indies. We have a question
Yes.
from chat that I want to throw your way. This is a
Mhm.
classic question from Smirky,
Yeah.
Twitch ambassador. But I do think it's always has an interesting answer, which is
Mhm.
tell us a bit about the creative process and coming up with models. People come up with such crazy and cool characters and designs. Tell us about
Mm.
how you came up with your character and your model.
Yeah, so I'm someone who's played a lot of D&D in my life for a very long time. And one of the last campaigns I did before I started streaming, before COVID happened, was an in-person campaign that lasted for years. We were playing weekly for almost 5 years. And we switched over to online. And when we switched over to online around COVID time, we started getting art of our characters and things to kind of try to make that experience a bit better because we'd played in person for so long. And what I look like now is very similar to what that D&D character was. So I had essentially been acting as that for that long. So when I decided to get a model and start streaming, I just couldn't imagine myself as anything else, So that's what I went with.
Now, do
D&D
you
seems like a
do you
perfect
do D&D on
inspiration.
stream?
I've done a couple of small one-shot campaigns on other people's streams. I haven't done one on my own, but I want to at some point.
Yeah,
Very cool.
nice. So, go ahead, Mary.
Oh, I was just going to say, we also asked you, Giga, to come and ask us questions. This isn't just
No,
us
I'm gonna actually before
Yeah.
Geek asks us questions, because then we'll be getting her
Mhm.
to ask us questions about VTubing. I want to talk some about the tech with VTubing for those
Sure.
people that are listening. So, talk a little bit about the journey and what I will call is the levels of VTubing. In other words, in fact, you could,
Mm.
because there really are these kind of levels, right? In terms of both your model, right, and
Yeah.
your sophistication of your model combined with it, your ability to detect movement, right, so that then
Yes.
your model becomes animated and alive and all that. So it'd be great for the audience if you just kind of and broke it down into kind of
Mhm.
the stages of, okay, here's the simplest, but then some do this and then some go all the way here.
Okay. Yeah, so I'd say the simplest form, something that I would still consider a VTuber, some people would call it a PNG tuber, which is just a person that's throwing a drawn image of their character in the corner of their stream while they play a game. And it's a visual representation of themselves, but it's not animated or anything. Sometimes they'll have them where they draw multiple frames where the mouth is open. So when they're talking, that frame will show with the mouth open. So it's almost like it's animated, but it's just picking up mic activity,
Right,
right?
it's not
And
really it's not a model, it's a
yeah,
set of 2D images.
exactly. And some people will
Okay.
do that, and they'll also get more 2D images for certain expressions, for certain emotions. So if something shocking happens on screen, they'll press a button, they'll do a macro of some sort, it'll put that image on top on OBS so they look shocked, right? So people will do that just to give it a little more life, especially if they're chatting and not gaming. So that's kind of level one, is just being a PNG, essentially.
PNG tuber.
Yeah, PNG tuber is what we'll often call it, because I think early on there was a lot of discourse of, is that really a VTuber, etc. And I was kind of in the camp of, yeah, it is, just give it a different name because it's not animated. There you go. It still counts. So that's easy, that's simple. A lot of people that streamed without face cams in a lot of other communities that weren't really ever VTubers previously, they just started putting PNGs on the screen because they often had a little characters that maybe their emotes, were some little character, something like that. So they would just use that. So that's stage one. After that, a lot of people get into VTubing as a 2D drawn model, which is what I am right now. And that's very simple. Well, it's complex when you actually do the work, but the concept is simple. An artist draws a bunch of art. They cut out all the pieces so that they can move separately from each other. Some animator comes in and rigs all of those things. They make it so that those animations make sense. They show how it should move. And then the person using the avatar, once that's all completed, you just set up a phone. That's it. You set up a phone. You get an app on your phone that matches a certain desktop app. There are a bunch of them out there, but they're all pretty easy to use. And the phone uses its normal face tracking that it has for other apps to tell what your face is doing. So if I close my eyes, right, it can see that my eyes are closing. Some animator has gone in and said, when the eyes close, they should look like this. And it just does that. That's it. So it's tracking everything you're doing and just relating it to the model. That's sort of stage 2, which I'd say most people use that because the fact that it just uses a phone makes it so accessible to be a 2D VTuber. It's easy on that end. And then If you want to do a
And now
lot
in
more,
stage two,
yes.
in stage
Mhm.
two, and sometimes I'll ask questions that I know the answer to,
Yeah,
but
go ahead.
I know that in stage two. So right now, for
Mhm.
example, you go ahead and move your head right to left,
Yeah.
right, and we'll see that it's tracking. But if you turned around, okay,
It'll look like
then
this. Ready?
basically, well, no, right. In other words, now you've turned around and then it stops. Basically, is the way to think of it, right?
Exactly.
Because you turn around and it has a limit, and it
Yeah, no
looks
one
like
drew
your
the back of
phone
my
was
head.
really. No one drew the back of your head, and that's
Right.
why we think of it as a 2D model, because what
Mhm.
it is different views of this 2D surface, but you can't turn
Yeah.
around, you can't do a flip, you can't do any of that. All right,
Exactly. I mean,
go
I
to the
was
next.
drawn in Photoshop, right? It is a flat
Mhm.
piece of art that we then the rigging and the things that make it look three-dimensional, where you're taking the art and you're stretching it and you're moving it around, but it's still a flat piece. So it's
Mhm.
2D in the end.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
most people do that because again, you just use a phone, you throw the phone in front of yourself. It does face tracking the same way. Most iPhones, for example, have their AR face tracking to unlock your iPhone so it can recognize that you're you, things like that. It uses the same tech and just looks at you and makes your avatar do what you're doing. Um,
Yep.
and then level 3 is kind of it could be any level of easy or hard, but that's 3D models, which it's the same way you would model a video game character, right? For a 3D game, you model something, and then the difference is someone goes in and rigs a bunch of animations to happen when your 3D trackers that you would wear do those things. That's the only difference.
Mhm.
Um, so it's the same way VRChat avatars are kind of made, very, very similar. And that could be anything from, again, just using an iPhone that would just track your head. And in that case, it can tell when it's the back of your head and you can turn around. Or you could be wearing Vive trackers, which are what a lot of people use in VRChat. I personally have an entire bodysuit for my 3D model, and gloves and everything. So if I move one finger, that finger gets moved on the model. If I move my foot and turn it around, that gets moved. That sort of thing.
And so I assume some days you decide to put on your full tracking suit
Mhm.
because of what you're planning on doing, and then
Yeah.
some days you say, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to, like, today
Yes.
is a good example. There's no need.
Mhm.
You're not going to be twirling and moving around
Right.
and all that. How often do you get in your full body suit on your stream?
Mm. For me, it's not super often. It's an occasional thing. I recently kind of debuted the 3D model, and of course, for that week, I was 3D most days. But I do it on and off because most of my community is used to me being 2D, and that's just kind of my comfort level too. Because I'm just playing video games and having to wear these gloves and hold a controller. It gets a little cumbersome.
Right. I mean, right now I am effectively a 2D model because there's no need for me to get up and spin around and do a flip and do all
Exactly.
that.
Maybe
Yeah,
he is.
And yeah, maybe I'm
you
only a
could
2D
be at any
model.
moment
I've
though.
never seen
Right?
him from the side.
Yeah, maybe
True.
maybe I'm just
How would we
AI
know?
in a 2D model, just could be.
You know,
Could be.
it's actually really uncanny, but some people have done that. They've rigged models of pictures of people, and it looks really weird. Very, very uncanny valley. But to prove how rigging works, they'll take a picture of a person and separate the art out and, well, not art, that picture out, and they'll rig it so that anyone can be that person. And it looks terrible. It does not look in any way
Mm,
good. You would never trick anyone, but it's possible.
yeah.
It probably just
All
looks like
right.
you took skin and like stretched it over a
Yeah,
basketball. Like
Yeah.
it's
there's
very
no
creepy
way that
looking.
actually like functions
Yeah.
properly. Yes,
No, no.
we really appreciate you taking your time to answer all of our
Mhm.
hard-hitting questions about VTubing and just your experiences. But I know we also want to make sure we have time for you to ask us questions. So please
Yeah.
take this time to ask any questions that you have.
Yes, and
Okay.
by the
I
way,
think.
I do need to
Mhm.
tell chat right now, the one thing I have no ability to do whatsoever is a flip. Even if there was a pool in front of me, like doing a flip into a pool is a belly flop. Okay, so
Yeah.
unfortunately, that skill does not exist in this body. So
AI
Hey,
can
me
otherwise,
then.
I stand
neither.
up and do it. You know.
Me neither.
All right,
I
all
can't
right.
do any of
So
that.
let's
When I got my
yeah.
3D model, they kept asking, "Oh, are you gonna do a cartwheel? Are you gonna do a flip?" I said, I'm in my office, and I don't do those things. I sit in a chair all day. I'm not doing a backflip in the 3D model.
Yep, yep.
I'm not one of
All
those.
right. With that, Giga, now why don't you go to some of the
Yes.
questions that you can talk about on behalf of the VTubing community?
Yeah. So as VTubers now, obviously this varies. Some of us will show our faces. I think actually a good
Mm.
number nowadays. They on social media, at least, maybe not when streaming, they post pictures, etc. But there are a lot that don't. And something that makes that a little, I would say, not just difficult, it gives us a lot of FOMO, is a lot of other streamers, a lot of the Twitch community get to meet up with each other and see each other in person and do content together. And that's how a lot of communities intertwine, right? Everyone goes to TwitchCon and they do an event. Someone makes a camp in their backyard, right? And everyone shows up for a special week of streaming. But VTubers are, for those that don't show their faces, completely locked out of that. We just never have that opportunity. Is there
Hmm.
any sort of way when it comes to events like TwitchCon, etc., you feel like you could maybe allow VTubers to better intertwine with other creators?
I think there's a lot of ways that we can absolutely improve. And I'm going to give some examples of things that we've done in the last year that I think have made some waves. And then I'd really love Dan to speak big picture about what our vision is for the future, because you're right, we have to make space for VTubers at events. So just a couple examples of things that we've shifted in recent years, because we recognize we have to do this because the VTubers want to participate at TwitchCon. We had our very first ever VTuber Glitch Showcase. It was the Bikini Bottoms, the chaotic yet delightful podcast. It featured Bao, Numi, and Shy Lily to a live audience. This was really interesting. So this is like maybe what the people at home saw, but this was actually a in-person event in our glitch theater to thousands of people who were just kind of at the con got to watch this, and they were live, which is really exciting. So they got to actually experience this, but with VTubers. We also in San Diego hosted our first ever VTuber meet and greet, which was quite a success. There's Iron Mouse meet and greeting with fans. There's someone like cosplayed as Iron Mouse. It's so cute. And so Iron Mouse was able to meet people as any streamer would be. Sakuna, like it's really cool. We're getting there. I do think that we need to continue to make advances in this space, but as you can see, we are making room for people to be able to meet their VTuber fans and just enjoy that experience as best they can. I also just want to say that behind the scenes, a lot of people don't know this, we altered our rules at TwitchCon. So VTubers can have full face coverings to protect their identities. Previously, full face masks and paint are not allowed because it's a safety concern. But once you're through security, you can wear full face mask and for additional anonymity. And we did that specifically because of our VTuber community. The last thing I'll just mention is while I don't think this is a full solution, we're also looking into ways that VTubers can attend meetups. These are our local events that you can have at any city. And recently, this is Seattle meetup. This is Dan meeting Kisaka Toriyama, which is a VTuber, and they're being held by Kenley. And so Dan met a VTuber at our Seattle meetup through an iPad. I understand that this is maybe like not the perfect solution, but we are so open to meeting VTubers in IRL spaces in any way we can. I'm really open to additional suggestions and recommendations from the community so that I can better serve you, because that is my job. And then Dan, go ahead.
Well, what I think you described, a great part of solving. There are different pieces of the problem as you think about the TwitchCon and these infra. One is the being able to engage in an IRL world manner with your community, right? And so putting you on stage is a way to bring VTubing so that the audience, who are not VTubers, get to experience VTubers at TwitchCon just like they can experience non-VTubers at TwitchCon. Same thing with the meet and greet, Mary, that you did, right? That means you can experience VTubers the same way you experience non-VTubers when you are an audience member. Okay. Of course, part of TwitchCon is the VTubers interacting and engaging with VTubers, right? Not the audience experiencing VTubers. Part of it is, well, I'll say streamers interacting with streamers. And really, there are two parts of that. One is VTubers interacting with non-VTubers, okay, of streamers now. The other
Right.
is VTubers interacting with VTubers, okay. You talked about the meet and that you talked about doing social things where those VTubers that are going to come can interact with each other. We do allow them to, cover their faces, right? As you said. Um, Now the reality is it's still not all that you would like,
Mm.
right? So for example, covering your faces helps somebody not identify you. But of course, a big part people build models or bodies and other things, right? So sometimes somebody, it's not always just the face. Somebody might be uncomfortable in terms of somebody seeing their body and being there and their body being physically there. I think that's one reason why I think the Creator Club is of the clubs is one of the ones that I'm most bullish on in terms of the importance of it. Um, because sometimes VTubers are making this choice because, in fact, they don't want to travel or they can't travel, right? And to the extent that they don't want to travel or they can't travel, we can do a lot of stuff to help facilitate the community that's at TwitchCon to be exposed to them. But if you're talking about building connections between VTubers for collaboration and other things, actually being at TwitchCon doesn't help now, because the nice part out of BCon is it is a face-to-face interaction and you can have an experience face-to-face that you can't have in a virtual world. So broadly, I would say maybe we break this down into three pieces. One is presenting, engaging with the community and the audience. Two is for those VTubers that are comfortable even if with a mask on, coming in person and making sure that they can still engage. But then you have a large portion of the VTubing community that say, well, no, I don't want to travel, or I'm not comfortable even with a mask on. And then if you're talking about creating, connections between them, I think it is through online platforms such as Discord.
Right. I agree. Something, I don't know if anyone in the chat has seen it, but something that myself and the company I'm with, VShojo, does, you might have seen myself or Iron Mouse, for example, on an iPad that is on something that looks like a Segway, a little robot that we actually
have
can
seen
drive
that.
around. Yeah, I've
Those
done
things
that.
are sick.
It's fun. It's fun. We actually control it. It's WASD, it's just a thing that we open in browser and we just drive it around and go and say hi to people. So we've actually done that. Yeah.
During COVID, we did that. I think it was like E3 before E3 was canceled.
Yeah.
We had streamers use those to be able to like run around. And so I think there's a world in which maybe those are something that we could bring back for like a TwitchCon or something. So yeah, we actually have experience with those. They're really wily, but they do work.
They do.
Well, they do work. GEEGA, let me ask you this. In my experience with them, they work in terms of going around and saying hi to people, right?
Yeah.
My sense is, but that getting to that next level of a connection and of a conversation, it's kind of like sometimes when I'm at these events, what I'm doing is going around and saying hi to everyone, but I'm not forming deep bonds, because the bonds usually occur when you go out to dinner afterwards and there's 6 of you chatting, right? Or you're doing something in between. But in the big thing, like if I take, like when I went to the Streamer Awards, I would go around and shake hands and I'd talk for 3 minutes or 5 minutes. Right. That doesn't create a deep bond. It can exploit one that exists, and so I've often said hi to Iron Mouse at those things, but that's different from me going and having dinner with Iron Mouse.
Right. Yeah, very much so. I think some friends have done this for me just to do this, but a lot of my friends will go to TwitchCon and I'll be at home and they'll actually set up an iPad at the table. Someone will bring one, or sometimes just their phone. They'll open Discord, get me in a call. I'll throw my model on the screen. I'll just screen share it. And they just sit me down at the table while they're at TwitchCon and I just hang out. Yeah. We've done that. And it's a somewhat bridge. It's not a proper solution, but it does help a little. But that is, reliant on me having friends that will do that, right? It's not something that just happens at this con because it's set up like that.
Yeah,
it's also
bit of extra work.
It's extra work. And I'll also say, I do think that it is, if you're sitting at the table while they're having dinner, it isn't the same experience, right? In terms of forming the connections, because you're kind of on the outside, you can't see this, there's all sorts of subtle clues that our eyes, take in. And that's one reason why I think really leaning into the VTuber meta community to further
Mhm.
strengthen those bonds through virtual techniques, right? And so I do hope that VTubers hopefully can actually explore how the creator club can be used in ways that the other creator clubs probably don't think about, because the VTubers will have more of a desire to use the virtual club as a
Yeah.
forum for forming connections, whereas the DJ club, they're like used to, oh, well, we hang out, I see you at the DJ thing, right? So they
Yeah,
don't need it
yeah.
as much. And so I actually think we'll be able to learn from the VTubing Creator Club, because you'll teach us ways to form virtual communities from distance that then we can apply to DJs and musicians and all these other groups of creators.
VTubers are also
Absolutely.
very welcome in lots of other different spaces as well. For
Yeah,
example,
that's great.
they are welcome in our guilds, and we do have VTubers in our guilds, our meetup organizations, and we have VTuber ambassadors, some which were on the image that Danilo showed for our creator club. Big Nose Bug and Miss Lala TV are VTubers that are Twitch ambassadors. So lots of
Yeah.
space for VTubers to get involved in Twitch
Yeah.
activities. Hopefully that gave you some insight into it. I'd love to make room for other questions that you have, Giga.
Yeah. So something that we've sort of already touched on, but is my favorite part of all of this, is that VTubing and VTubers, all this is one community that is a huge meta community, right? It is not brought together by a specific game or anything. It is simply any content creator, any streamer that decided to use an avatar instead of a face cam or no face cam, right? It's just which of those boxes did they tick. And because of that, it's a very unique community, and it has a lot of very wide-reaching needs and opinions, and very different people. Is there any way that this isn't really about VTubing, but considering that this community is so great as it is, and being so wide, is there a way for Twitch to maybe help foster more wide communities like this? I know we do have, some creator clubs and things, but what about making
Sure.
some start in a way?
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is, and you said it well, that in fact VTubers are about, I'm going to say for a second, who you are, at least on screen,
Hmm.
versus what you do.
Yes.
Right? That's another way to say it. Now, of course, it's who you are on stream. It's not who you are in real life. Okay, but it's who you are on stream, as opposed to what you do. Whereas playing
Hmm.
Marvel Rivals is what you do. Okay,
Right.
who you are is your VTuber. Um, uh, Interestingly, and as you think about this, interesting, I think the Unity guilds are kind of like that,
Hmm.
because they are designed to bring together meta communities around your identity, who you are, rather than what you do.
Right.
Okay. And I do think that's one thing that, Mary can talk more about, but since we're not focusing on the guilds, I won't get her to go. One of the things that, she's figuring out is, look, we need to expand the guilds more internationally, but then we also have to think of different solutions that allow us to meet needs of different identities that, besides the four that we serve today, and the current way we do it doesn't quite scale. So we're trying to figure out how to foster those meta communities around an identity, be it a veteran or Asian American or something else, which are another identity. I also think you see this in some other areas. So if I take music streamers, now, of course, music streamers, is you think of that's something that you do on stream. Okay. But just like gamers, music streamers will spend a lot of time just chatting. Okay. And sometimes a good example is Office Drummer, who's a music streamer, and more now he's doing IRL. Okay. And I know a number of music streamers that then diversify, and they may identify as a music streamer, but they spend 20, 30, 40% of their time just chatting or IRL. So music is like, for example, I am a music streamer, but I don't spend most of my time doing music. Okay. So I think that is a similar type of, because they identify as a musician. Okay.
Mm.
And I think that may be true with the creator DJs. So interestingly, as you look across the creator clubs, while they are defined by what you do, I find many times those folks, that is just part of what they do on stream. And so I would kind of say, like, the creator clubs is almost exploring how to bring people, and the Unity guilds are both forms of trying to explore this, right?
I
And the
think
question is, what are other areas like that?
yeah, I think to that point, we're also really trying to push more into global based events that anyone can participate in. And it's even better if you participate in groups. Some examples
Right.
would include Halloween, when we do Fright Fest and we ask everybody to like play scary games together. And we do celebrate and showcase groups on the front page with shelves and promo. And we try to do like exclusive badges or emotes if people get involved. We did the same thing for I've been calling it Twitch Miss, but I think we call it Holiday Hoopla, or like some kind of holiday
Mhm.
event. We're going to do more of those this year. We want people to get involved in those ecosystems. And then I think another one that I really think, this is not VTuber focused, but even in your question, you were like, hey, it doesn't have to be for VTubers, just ways that we
Yeah,
can kind of
yeah.
like all rally. We've seen a really nice uptick of people just getting really excited to break records. And that's been really exciting to see. A lot of people have been doing that recently, like Iron Mouse breaking the most subs. And then this year, an AI VTuber, Nero-sama, broke the hype train record on January 1st. Congratulations, Nero-sama. That's freaking incredible. We actually started a trend last year when Pirate Software broke the hype train record, and they got like their community got an emote exclusively for them because it was something they all worked on to get. And I'm happy to say that we are working towards doing that for Nero-sama as well. We just need to get like all the legal mumbo jumbo behind the scenes done, but we will be doing that. So we want to make sure that we're celebrating people for like breaking records and achieving wonderful things here at Twitch. And I think that is something we can all rally around no matter what. As long as you're in a group, I feel like you can accomplish incredible things.
You know, Mary, one idea that just occurs to me as you talk about this, that remember this and we should look into it. There is something about getting excited about breaking a record. And one of the things that's gaming companies realize this is they create lots of opportunities for this by cutting the pie in many different ways.
Yeah.
Okay, meaning by, I am the most subbed music channel, whatever that means. I am the most this, because right now, you know, you talked about these global records. But of course, there are tons of streamers that can't break a global record, right? You can think of lots of ways to cut it, like the most subbed affiliate channel, right? Because now you're in a smaller group, the most blah, blah, blah. So we should think about how to create these different sub areas that we can help people understand as they set records, so that more people can do it, as opposed to just, you know, just a small number that are super big. You know,
I have a question from Flashhound, if we can ask it from chat for you, GEEGA. Any personal advice for those looking to get started in VTubing?
Ooh, don't be tempted to buy a $5,000 model just because you want one. I do think a lot of people, so they can be very cheap. You can get a model very cheap, but they can also be very expensive. There's a huge range. And a lot of people will watch a big streamer, a big VTuber, and they'll go, I want what they have. And then they approach an artist and they realize this is going to cost them that much. And sometimes they'll just do it. They'll just drop, you know, so much money on it because it's cool. But I think you should figure out if you like streaming first. Personally, you might use that model, go live, and go, wow, I don't really want to do this that much. You know, maybe once a week or something, maybe once a month, you know? So definitely start really small and work up. I mean, my first model, it didn't even have legs. It was just the upper body. I just never scrolled, you know? I never showed the rest of it. It barely did anything. Yeah, it was like if you just go from like waist down and cut that out, right? It was just the upper body because I was just in the corner, just my head showing while I was playing games, you know? So just get the minimum. A lot of people in chat are suggesting PNGs, and I agree, you know, start at level 1, get a PNG, and see if you like streaming, if you like the hobby, because being a VTuber isn't about being a VTuber at all. It's just about streaming or delivering some kind of content. And then being a VTuber is a choice you make on top of it. So that is my advice. Get into PNGs.
I also think one of the things that I think we'll see growing is hybrid streamers too. now
Yeah.
that the tech has become simpler, um, it is the fact that sometimes there's this. Now, I don't experience this just because the way I am. I I wear whatever I wear on, and I'm at work right now. Okay,
We
so
try. We
we
try.
try, it doesn't work. Okay, that ain't gonna work. Okay, but that's just me. There are a lot of people
Right.
who it's very different if they're going to be presenting themselves on screen. They need to think about it. It's like, no, I don't feel like putting myself on the
Hmm.
stream right now. And I think hybrid streaming will be interesting now that the technology, and I also think it's very interesting for people that stream to be investing in, having this avatar that they can then even at times with interact on their stream. I think one
Yeah.
thing that'll be interesting, as people, you see this now, some streamers, in fact, you see some VTubers that actually are interacting with AI bots on their stream,
Mm,
right? And it creates
yeah.
content for them to react to. So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that's going to come from this.
For sure. A lot of my friends that are non VTubers, just face cam streamers, a good number of them have gotten models within the past year, and I've actually helped a lot of them, figure out what artists to go to, etc. And it's a comfort thing for them. Some of them have. Sometimes it's a big medical condition related thing, and they're feeling really sick that day, but they still want to stream, but they are aware they look absolutely terrible in that moment, and they just say, you know what, let me just turn the model on, and then I don't have to worry about it. And that way people can see their reactions, they can see their facial expressions and what they're feeling, but they're not literally looking at their just dead face as they're sick. And some people it's a comfort thing. Some people are more anxious than others, and they'll have days where they're fine being seen and other days where they don't want to hit go live, not because they don't want to stream, but just because they don't feel like being seen that day. So it gives that option. I
Yeah.
think that's been really nice for a lot of my friends to have that option.
So I'm going to go to a question that I know a number of VTubers have.
Yeah.
And Giga, you might not want to be the one to ask this question, or you might, but
Okay.
I will go ahead and ask the question that I know many
Hmm.
VTubers have, and then answer it because I know it's one that's on many VTubers' mind. Is the whole a question about our enforcement guidelines, and
Mm.
when we publish the enforcement guidelines, the attire guidelines, and in particular the comparison to VRChat. Okay, and
Yes,
in
I
terms
was
of
gonna
what our
ask.
guidelines are. Okay, good,
Yeah.
good. Well, why you can feel free to ask. Why don't you go ahead and
Yeah,
ask? But I wanted to go ahead and ask the way you would ask it then.
of course. I think, I mean, I was definitely gonna say it nicely because I think a lot of it comes from just confusion, people not being sure what the guidelines are, who they apply to. Maybe they're looking for more clarity. Some people are just complaining. Some people are more validly complaining. There's a lot of different ranges on that. But overall, a lot of VTubers are confused about the outfit policy. They'll think maybe it means one thing, and then they get their model made, which takes like 6 months to a year sometimes, and then they debut it
Right.
that day, and then they're told that's not allowed actually, right? So there's a lot of uncertainty on what is and isn't allowed, and then why, like you said, why can a VR chat avatar look a certain way, but then this person who's using a model that they also use in VR chat not allowed to stream a video game with that or chatting, that
Yeah,
sort of thing.
yeah. So first, let me yeah, and I think this is a good question. In fact, some of this I'll also throw out there is because
Mhm.
you highlight one of the problems that exist here that doesn't happen in the real world that I'd love for us to find a better solution for. Um, so first of all, when we published the enforcement guidelines, there was no change to our policy.
Right.
In fact, part of what we were trying to do was sometimes people have to implicitly figure out what the policy is by talking to people that have endorsements. And what we were trying to do was to be clear about how we were, and we didn't change how we were enforcing it all around then. But of course, as we do it, that also then brings more attention to something that was already happening in terms of enforcements. Okay, but we didn't change anything with the enforcement guidelines. Now, our general policy is that we apply the same attire guidelines to a VTuber as we do to a person. Okay, in terms of the clothing that they have on their body, in terms of covering their hips and everything else. And now I'm not going to go into talking through the nuances of the attire policy for humans because that is something that first of all, I'm not the expert on all the nuances of enforcing the attire policy on humans. It's also something that is nuanced, and you have to be, very careful on. And we've tried to communicate what is our attire policy for humans. And so the same thing applies to VTubers. Now, the big question is, well, wait, why is that when you don't have the same policy with VRChat? And then, in fact, shouldn't VTubing just be like VRChat? Okay. And I understand why VTubers avoid. That seems unfair. They can have that, avatar in VRChat, but I can't have it as I'm a VTuber. The reason for the difference is, and you highlighted earlier about how VTubers do everything on our site. Okay. VRChat, if VRChat is a game and VRChat has a rating in the game, and when people go to VRChat, they have certain expectations about the type of content that they are going to be exposed to in terms of the avatars that they may see. Now, of course, VRChat is just an environment, and VRChat can all be lollipops and bubblegum and unicorns, or VRChat can be people in, less attire for their avatars and all sorts of things. Okay. However, it is the fact that much of especially since when you're in VRChat, you have no idea who you might run into. It's certainly the case that as you go and watch somebody streaming in VRChat, you learned a given expectation about what you might see in terms of VRChat. And we, of course, use the game ratings and other things to make sure that users are aware of that. That is not the case with a VTuber, because a VTuber can play Minecraft, right? A VTuber can do anything. And so there, when you have less attire, for some people, they might find that that may not be what they are looking for when they are going into a Minecraft stream. Okay. And especially given we have people of all ages, it's not just an age thing, but it is the fact that we have people of all ages, not of all ages, of 13 and above on Twitch. And you do want to think differently when somebody's under 18, but there's also lots of users of all sorts of ages. That's like, no, that's just not what I want to be, exposed to in terms of, I'll say less attire. And so that's the reason we kind of need to treat VTubing different than VRChat, because of the very nature of it. And interestingly, in this, like, I think these lines are going to continue to blur, where more and more in gaming, you're going to have control over your avatar in gaming. Okay. And you'll have more and more expressibility. In GTA 6, Lord knows what you'll be able to do in your avatar in
it's
GTA 6.
It's going to question those things. And we might have to continue to adapt our policy to see how things go. But that is where we're currently standing with it, which is like your VR model, we are comparing to a person, because like a person, which you are, you can change games, you can change categories, you can do all these different things. But when you're in a game, that's a game model. So we consider them separate.
So can I ask two follow-up questions on that? Because I get what you're saying, Dan. Completely agree, right? Because at least when you're playing certain games, you have certain labeling and things, which I assume has a lot to do with advertisers and a lot of these other things, like just knowing, what's going on the platform. What about, let's say, now I don't do this. You can see I'm covered head to toe, but let's say I wanted to get an outfit that was more revealing. I know, for example, I can go into the pools, beaches, hot tubs category and show it off there. What if I wanted to just be like that all the time? Could I, in the future, maybe consider having some sort of label or content classification that lets me do that? So that, let's say people want to filter that out, and it's not fully adult content, for example, but I know the nature of this outfit is what it is, and I want to just click a button and say, I want to do anything and be in any category doing this, but I'm not trying to be shown to, the minors that might be on the site. Would there be a way to kind of meet in the middle there?
I think so. By the way, you talked about the two different ways of doing this. One is labeling, and the other is a category.
Yes.
Okay, and those are those have different pros and cons, and sometimes we do both, right? In other words, so for example, with the attire exception, right, for a human, you need to be in the hot tubs category, and that is applied. And now some people may not want to be in the hot tubs category, but they want to use the attire exception. And it's like, no, sorry.
Mhm.
If you want to use the attire exception, you need to be in the hot tub category. And
Right.
it's not just labeling it. Okay. The tricky, by the way, and I think thinking of something like that is certainly something that we, can be thinking of and are, and trying to figure out how to handle this. One of the
Mhm.
challenges that we face is, as we do certain things, sometimes people find ways to exploit it to an extreme. And the best example is when
Yeah.
we made the change in terms of drawing and allow to use the human figure. And then
Right.
art suddenly became dominated with a certain amount of content. And I will tell
Yeah.
you, the thing that in general doesn't work great on Twitch is what I will call hybrid categories that have two very different use cases.
Right.
And ASMR is an example of one such category. That ASMR has like two very different communities that kind of use ASMR, but it's all and an audience that is different, but it's all within one category. Okay. So
Mhm.
that's my one hesitancy about just labeling, because then it can create certain categories might become where 50% of the content in that category is labeled. And now you create what is a hybrid category in terms of the audience that it's serving. Whereas hot tubs, it's better because if you take hot tubs versus ASMR, hot tubs is not as much of a hybrid category because there are not a lot of people that are just streaming in hot tubs just because they happen to be hanging out in a hot tub. And that's what they're just doing for the day. But I think
It
that
sounds
idea is
like it's
definitely one
managing
thing to consider.
expectations, really, is what you're pointing
Yeah.
out, right? Like, just okay,
Mhm.
that makes sense to me. Yeah.
And here's
We
my
we also
now.
just have like a world of like gamers, and they're
Mhm.
min-maxing understandably what we put out there because they are looking for ways to still express themselves but stay within our terms of service. I get that. Generally, what we want to try to avoid, though, is having such specificity in our rules that people are looking for ways
Mhm.
to circumvent them, as opposed to
Yeah.
what we really want, which is make sure that when you are expressing what you want to do, that your audience knows what they're in for. Don't tell me that you're Sailor Moon when you're gushing over magical girls. We can
Right.
tell.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And by the way, that goes to, in general, like there's whenever you have something that is sort of a little bit subjective in terms of the line. This is one thing that I see in chat a lot. Think, oh, it's inconsistent. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, another way to talk about consistency. Suppose I had you know, a black piece of paper and a white piece of paper, and I asked 100 people, is it black or white? Okay. Everyone will give me the same answers, right? Now, suppose I had chartreuse versus pick another color that is very close to chartreuse that many people may not really fully have a model of, violet versus purple, right? Which are two
Right.
different colors. To be honest, I can't tell you the difference between violet versus purple. And if I asked a bunch of people, is it violet or purple? That in fact, you'd have a lot of people that get it wrong. And that's because the difference between violet and purple is very small. Okay. And especially as you start talking about these things in terms of attire, sexual content, that sort of thing, it can be very subjective. And so, in fact, as people try to move up to the boundary to get something as purple as possible, but still be violet, okay, let's assume for a second purple's not allowed, but violet is. But they want to be as
Mhm.
close to purple without being it.
Mhm.
You're going to have a lot of people that are going to call it purple, and then you're going to have some purple stuff that the rater's going to call violet
Yeah.
because it is not clear. And so, what then ends up happening is you can find examples. Look, here's this violet thing, and they said it was purple, but this person was purple and they said it was violet. Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
answer is that is the nature of this problem when you have highly subjective things. Whereas in other areas, it's not highly subjective. Frequently, in terms of, hate speech, it's pretty clear this person said this like horrendous thing. Okay.
Right.
And so I encourage people, if you're trying to get as close to the line without going over the line, and then sometimes you get caught for going over the line when technically you can say, but I wasn't over the line. And this person, I'm like, stop trying to live so close to the line.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, you did highlight a problem that VTubing has that does not happen in people, is if somebody is figuring out their attire and they find out because they get a warning about their attire, will they put on a different top tomorrow?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's easy. Okay. For VTubers, since it takes time to spend to get your model and get the attire for your model and all that, it's like, well, shoot, I just spent a fair amount of money on this. Okay.
Mhm.
And I wish I would have known this in advance. I wouldn't have spent the money. I would love if we had some way to kind of help with 2D models or other things, kind of make an assessment of, and that may also be the type of thing that maybe VTubers help us with this, right? That in
Right.
fact, you would get a group of VTubers that, we work with, and then maybe something happens that in the VTuber Creator Club is VTubers, like, you can almost like, it's borderline. And if
Mhm.
it's
I was actually going
borderline,
to suggest that in the
then
creator club. Yeah.
yeah,
So we actually do that in our ambassador group, and we
Mhm.
have VTubers that represent the ambassador selection. There's going to be more about this soon, but we really want to utilize our ambassadors as a way to help us get perspective from various creators. And ambassadors are meant to get sources because nobody's a monolith. So our ambassadors absolutely should be going to the creator clubs, getting broad understandings of like what those intricacies are, and then bringing that to us so that we can make better decisions for trust and safety. So we are absolutely doing that. I'm sorry, I wish I could like unveil this
Yeah.
right now, but I can't. We're going to talk about it probably in like,
Mhm.
I think in our open letter we'll be talking about some of this stuff.
good,
For
good.
sure.
All right. Well, Mary, you know what we
We
should do, because
have
there
to
are a
get to
ton of
our
questions.
Q&A, Dan.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I was going to say. So,
I'm
Giga, this has been
sorry.
great.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming, and looking forward. We should do a stream together sometime, whether it's in my
Absolutely.
VTuber character or not. So maybe
We
we'll
need
plan.
VTuber Dan back. We need him back.
Yeah, yeah, I know. So ping me on Discord or something to make sure I do it.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, Giga.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.